People in America trusted Walter Cronkite's voice. JFK was the most loved president in history. They looked like friends on TV. They fought all the time behind the scenes. Kennedy once tried to back out of an interview that had already been filmed. He told the people in charge of the network about Cronkite. Cronkite, who was very angry, stomped into Kennedy's guest room. The president cared more about how he looked than what he was saying. The reporter saw everything. Their secret fights were kept secret for decades. We'll tell you what really happened between these two American stars today. Walt Cronkite was born in 1916 in Missouri. He was the only child in his family. His dad worked as a doctor. His mom stayed home. At first they lived in Kansas City, then in Houston, but he always lived in Kansas City on his own. Walter was interested as a child. He wrote things down, read encyclopedias, and asked questions that no one else did. As a high school student, he was in charge of the school newspaper, ran for office, and even won a state award for writing. Because his folks were having a hard time with money, he also did odd jobs. His first year at the University of Texas was 1933, but he dropped out after 2 years to work full-time in newspapers. He started working for United Press in 1937. That's where things went from there. He studied with the Army as one of only 8 combat reporters during World War II. He bombed Germany from the air and sent news from the front lines in Normandy and the Battle of the Bulge. Now that the war was over, he helped set up bureaus all over Europe and was made the head of the Moscow office. What he went through in those years made him into the person who is now known as the most trusted voice in America. John F. Kennedy came into the world in a very different way. However, his body was breaking down before he could even speak. He had money, power, and family ties. He was sick all the time. There was scarlet fever, stomach troubles, and a lot of infections. In his teens, he lost too much weight, which was bad. It was hard for doctors to figure out. Later, they said he had colitis, but it was more likely celiac disease. He tried a lot of different treatments, such as putting pills under his skin. That did help a little, but it made his bones weak. He was finally told he had Addison's disease in 1947 while he was out in England. In 1954, things got worse when one of his backbones broke. He had to use sticks. He was in pain all the time. He had dangerous surgery on his back and told his dad he'd rather die than live that way. He still became a war hero, though. He was on his boat when a Japanese ship hit it in 1943. Kennedy swam for 5 hours while holding a strap in his teeth and pulling a hurt crew member behind him. He would always remember that moment. He was sick, weak, and in pain all the time, but he was so strong it was hard to believe. In 1960, there was a change in American politics. It wasn't just presidential discussions that people were listening to for the first time. They were watching TV with them on. A lot of people watched as Senator John F. Kennedy and Vice President Richard Nixon fought on TV, but there was a quiet tug-of-war going on behind the scenes long before the cameras came out. Walt Cronkite was right in the middle of it all. Cronkite had planned for both candidates to be interviewed by CBS several times. He wished things were fair. He was aware that the person who went first might be in a worse position. He then asked Nixon if it was okay for him to go first. Nixon didn't think about it. He said, "That's fine." Everything is fine. Things got tense when Cronkite told Kennedy, though. Kennedy did not believe him. He hasn't agreed to it yet. He lost it. What do you mean it was a small thing that showed something bigger? Kennedy was careful, maybe even suspicious, but he picked up things quickly. Kennedy finally decided to do the interview, but he didn't like it when it aired. He didn't think he did well. As soon as shooting was over, he told CBS to cancel it. Afterwards, he went around Cronkite and called the network CEO. He wanted to do everything over. Cronkite was very angry. He walked right into Kennedy's room and saw the senator laying on his back next to his speechwriter. Cronkite did not scream. He agreed to do it. Kennedy could do the interview again, but CBS would show a message that said it was his second try. That really stopped Kennedy. He gave up because he knew how that would look. He let them show the interview as it was, without any changes. Kennedy changed after that. He learned how strong TV really was. He began getting ready like never before. He practiced giving answers, remembering facts, and keeping a cool face. Nixon, on the other hand, didn't care about the cameras. He was easy to miss because he was dressed in a light suit. He didn't put on any makeup. He looked pale, tired, and sweaty under the hot studio lights. Kennedy looked strong and sure of himself in his dark suit and good lighting. Nixon was shown on TV, and the mayor of Chicago joked, "My God, they've embalmed him before he even died." Kennedy knew how to use TV well. He had it down pat by the third discussion. It was like he was talking to you when he talked to the camera. Even when he was planning what to say, he seemed natural. Kennedy was in New York on October 13th, and Nixon was in Los Angeles. They were in different places, but it didn't matter where they were. Kennedy looked straight into the camera and spoke easily. When he talked about foreign policy and the islands of Quemoy and Matsu in China, he made it sound straightforward and honest. Kankite said that those discussions changed everything after he saw them all. It was a different kind of politics. Cranite began to see things differently after Kennedy was elected, though. Kennedy looked like a hero on TV. Kankite thought he was someone else when he wasn't on camera. Kankite later said that he was a bit egotistical and that he was very self-centered. He saw that Kennedy was having a hard time working with Congress. A lot of politicians didn't like how quickly he rose. They didn't believe he deserved it. That wasn't helped by Kennedy. He had a hard time getting things done. A lot of his big ideas didn't become law until after he died. What he did in other countries also seemed shaky. That was the first time Kennedy said, "This has to be the war of Vietnam. They've got to understand that this can't be our war." Later, he changed his mind and said the opposite. He sent more troops. He made the war about America. Conite remembers that very well. He believed that Kennedy's deeds did not match what he said, but most Americans didn't see that side. Conite showed the Kennedy to them on the evening news. Beautiful, young, and sure of themselves. The person who won the argument by being ready. What made him beat Nixon? Not better ideas, but better lighting, sharper clothes, and a calmer face when things got tough. Walter Kankite had seen what political talk was like before, but nothing could have made him ready for April 1961. That's when the Bay of Pigs invasion turned out to be one of the worst mistakes the U.S. ever made in foreign policy. Conite will never forget that time. People who work for CBS and the New York Times already knew about the attack plan. Cuban exiles who had been taught in the United States were getting ready to land and overthrow Fidel Castro, but the Kennedy administration told them to be quiet. They said it was for the safety of the whole country. Conite later said it was an act of loyalty. The Times changed its mind. CBS did the same thing, and their quiet may have helped the plan go forward. After many years, Kennedy himself said that we might not have gone to the Bay of Pigs if the New York Times had written that. The assault went badly. Cuba's troops were ready. Either the attackers were killed or caught. Cronkite said it ended any chance of peace between the U.S. and Cuba and hurt the young president who was still getting used to being president. After a year, Kennedy did something else, but this time she did it in secret. The New York Times had a front-page story on July 26, 1962. That the Soviets were making covers out of concrete for their missile bases was what it said. The story also showed what spy cameras in the U.S. could really see. Robert Kennedy told the FBI to start listening in on phones that same day. First, a secretary at the Times building, and then the New York home of the writer. This quickly grew into something much bigger. After 1 month, on August 22, Kennedy met with John McCain, who was head of the CIA. He told him to start keeping an eye on reporters. The CIA didn't follow the rules and spy on people in the U.S., but they did it anyway. Project Mockingbird was the name of the plan. A lot of top staff members who had access to secret information were told to write down everything they did with the press. In 2007, after many years, papers about the process were made public. The New York Times said that Kennedy tried to do the same thing with the CIA before Nixon built his own unit to stop leaks. The program went on until 1965 and was aimed at reporters all over the country. Few of them were as well known as Robert S. Allen and Paul Scott. It was a bad standard for presidents to follow. The interaction between Conite and Kennedy was tense from the start. Conite said in one interview that Kennedy once complained about being on a soft sofa during a TV broadcast. Kennedy said it made him look weak and not like a president. Conite was struck dumb. He thought the president cared more about how things looked than what they said. He also saw that Kennedy often answered before the question was over. Cronite said it was likely because Kennedy thought quickly, but it still made him mad. He didn't like how the president ran the news either. CBS and other news outlets only got parts of the story during the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. The White House was in charge of everything. It was sanitized, controlled, and biased. Cronite later said that reporters never got to see all the great things that were going on behind the scenes. During Kennedy's time in office, that strain stayed with him. The people never saw any of this, though. They saw a young, strong boss. They didn't know that Kennedy was in the middle of a terrible war inside his physique. The president was on a mix of drugs during the tense days of the missile situation in October. He took antispasmodics for colitis, medicines for a urinary tract infection, and steroids like testosterone and hydrocortisone to deal with problems with his adrenal glands. To keep himself in check, he took painkillers, sleeping pills, tranquilizers like Librium, and even amphetamines like Artulin. On paper, he looked like a pharmacy on wheels. Kennedy was in a lot of pain behind closed doors, mostly from an injury to his back that happened years before. That probably got worse because of some of the drugs he was on. A disease that was talked about was Addison's disease, as a straight question from historian Arthur Schlesinger, Jr. in 1959. In a way, Kennedy was telling the truth when he said, "No one with real Addison's disease should run for president, but I do not have it." When it was first described, Addison's disease had to be caused by TB of the adrenal glands. Kennedy didn't have that, but he did have adrenal failure and had to take steroids all the time to stay alive. It's likely that treatment made his bones weaker, especially in his spine. Something happened on November 22, 1963, that will never be the same again in television. It was 4:40 p.m. on the East Coast when CBS cut away from a soap show to give them news. In Dallas, shots had been fired at President John F. Kennedy just 10 minutes before. But back then, it wasn't as easy as turning on a camera. It took at least 20 minutes for the studio cameras to get ready. Walter Cronite had to go live with just his voice because he was the most trusted sound in America. There was no face or picture. There was only sound over a black screen that said CBS News Bulletin. Cronite spoke quietly to people at home, even though chaos was going on behind the scenes. He read the first email, then the second, and finally the third. There were shots first. Next, Kennedy was hit, and finally, news came that the president might be dead. But Cronite didn't say it was truth. He didn't say anything. He held out. Things finally got dark at 2 p.m. Cronite came on without his jacket and looked stressed and out of breath, but he kept going. He kept the country informed for almost an hour without letting his feelings get in the way. When the clock struck 2:38 p.m., everything changed. The man looked at the camera and read the news from the Associated Press. By way of Dallas, Texas, the flash seems to be real. Kennedy passed away at 10 p.m., time in Central Europe. He looked at the time and said, about 38 minutes ago. He then took his glasses off, blinked, and cleared his throat. His voice broke for a split second. A lot of people in the U.S. saw it. The man on TV who was the most calm was breaking down. Everyone in the country knew it was okay to feel something during that very short pause. Cronite didn't stop for 4 days. He was on the air for almost 72 hours straight. He led the country through shock, loss, and chaos. It was no longer just reporting. It was like writing history right then and there. All 3 of the big networks showed coverage non-stop. Everyone in the country watched together. They both felt sad. Along with each other, they looked for meaning. It was more than just being a reporter for Andrew Cronite. He became a reflection of the American spirit. He whispered to the camera the night of Kennedy's funeral, "Only history can write the importance of this day." He then asked if this dark moment could somehow lead to a sunrise of understanding. He then said something even more important, something that people remembered. It's likely that most Americans will feel like they failed in some way before they go to bed tonight. Those words helped shape how people would remember Kennedy, both as a person and as a sign of hope that never got to grow. Cronite was having trouble behind the scenes, though. He was tired and torn between being a writer and a person. That's why he didn't cry all the way. He kept it together for everyone to see. Some of them broke. A man on NBC named Chad Huntley was clearly mad. Cronite stayed steady while Ron Cochran of ABC shook on live. He didn't rush even when CBS got early word that Kennedy was dead. Dan Rather was sure. It had been said on CBS radio before Cronite spoke up. His words were always, "These are only reports." He didn't say it was official until The Wire said it was. And he still said, apparently official. That one word, apparently, told you a lot about him. Walt Cronkite had seen everything. He was there when Kennedy was on the rise and when everything fell apart. But many years later, when JFK was still being praised as a saint, Cronkite raised an eyebrow in a quiet way. He said it straight out in a CBS interview. Kennedy didn't understand how to work with Congress. A lot of his most important rules were made after he died. It wasn't magic. Lyndon B. Johnson was in charge of that. He looked right into the camera and said it was Kennedy's dream when he signed the Civil Rights Act in 1964. Behind the scenes, though, most experts felt that Bill might have died on the floor if JFK was still alive. Johnson did more than just push it through. He pushed it down. That was just the start. Johnson pushed through 200 big laws over the next 2 years. These included Medicare, Medicaid, funding for schools, and even laws to protect the environment. Cronite knew what was going on because he was right next to Washington. Johnson was using the country's sadness to move things forward. Kennedy got the praise. Johnson got what he wanted. But not every change of power went well. Cronkite took a plane to Vietnam on February 27, 1968. He saw how crazy things were after the Tet attack, and then came back with a decision that shocked the whole country. He said that things were not going anywhere in America. It hit hard because it came from Cronite. It was said that Johnson said, "If I've lost Cronite, I've lost Middle America." But there was a bigger contradiction going on here. Kennedy had gone in a very different direction just a few years before. He signed NSAM 263 in October 1963, which laid out plans to pull 1,000 troops out of Vietnam by the end of that year. He even agreed that the whole army should leave by 1965. He was ready to win right away, no matter what. That was the plan, but the plan disappeared after he was killed. Johnson was in charge. Before 1965, the U.S. wasn't just giving advice either. It was a fight. At the end of that year, 185,000 American forces were in Vietnam. Kennedy began with 16,000. Johnson made a war out of it. That's why Cronite said there was no winner, it wasn't just fighting. It made me think of what could have been. Cronite also didn't say some things. People in America trusted him more than any other reporter, but he never told them about Kennedy's affairs, especially the stories about Marilyn Monroe. In the news, everyone knew, so of course he did. Some people said Monroe spent the weekend at Bing Crosby's house in secret. Monroe is said to have called Jackie Kennedy on the phone, and there was a tape of that call. Monroe also sang Happy Birthday in a dress that looked like it was painted on. Jackie didn't go out that night at all. In its place, she went to a cookout. Some say Monroe thought the connection was serious. Cronite didn't say anything about whether it was or wasn't. Back then, that was the rule. No matter how important the story was, you didn't write about the president's personal life. There was no bad press for Kennedy, at least in public. Cronkite wasn't blind, though, and as time went on, doubt began to show. He began to think that maybe he had helped finish a Kennedy that wasn't real. He said that Kennedy was very self-centered and had a kind of egotism in another conversation. That's a long way from the story of Camelot that Americans were told. Cronite was the voice of those 4 dark days in November 1963. The country knew when Kennedy died because of his calm voice. His glasses fell off. His eyes got heavy. A lot of people remember that moment. He said, maybe, just maybe, Kennedy's death could bring Americans together at the end of his 4-day report. Walt Cronkite did a risky 2-part story about the Watergate affair in October 1972. The news media didn't really care about it at the time, but Cronite did. He talked about it for 22 minutes on CBS during prime time. Everything changed because of that choice. It made the story famous across the country. Later, Ben Bradlee, the editor of the Washington Post, said that once Cronite wrote about it, people finally began to pay attention. It was what he called a turning point. An Emmy was given to Kankite for that story. It was the most important award he had ever received, and he called it the Big Doozy. But there was also something more going on. Cronite was different now. He wasn't the same newsman who used to like looks and charm. His attention was now on facts, content, and holding power responsible. He said this was something he didn't always do when John F. Kennedy was president. After many years, Kankite published his autobiography, A Reporter's Life. It wasn't just another book. It was a huge surprise. He finally told the truth about what JFK was really like behind the scenes in it. Kennedy had always been seen as smooth, smart, and charming by everyone. But Cronite told a different story. He said Kennedy was very focused on himself, sure of themselves and driven by their own ego, the kind of person who had to be in charge and didn't get along with Congress at all. That last part was very important because Kennedy had always been seen as a leader who got things done. Cronite, however, said that most of JFK's important rules were made after he died. It was a fake picture, and Kankite helped sell it. His book was more than just a look back, and it was an admission. He said that he and other people in the press had helped to make the story of Camelot. Then, 40 years after Kennedy was killed in 2003, Cronite did even more. That's what he said again when he was on CBS The Early Show. JFK was very focused on himself. People were shocked. That man had once choked up while telling everyone that Kennedy had died. He had taken off his glasses at that point. The whole country cried with him because his voice had broken. He wasn't afraid to tell the truth anymore. Still, he didn't say anything bad about Kennedy. He thought it was good that he kept his cool during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was his best moment. Cronite said it made people trust him again, but not so much the rest. He said Kennedy hadn't done much before that and that it was hard for him to run Congress. These were not just old man's mean words. They were honest thoughts that had been polished by time. Kankite and Kennedy's friendship turned out to be a lot messier than most people thought. Even more was found in A History of Kankite by Douglas Brinkley. In spite of his claims to be a fair journalist, Cronite had close links with powerful people, especially the Kennedy family. He even worked closely with Bobby Kennedy when he was running for president at one time. It would be considered rude to be that close these days. Cronite was able to get in, and the Kennedys got good press in return. The book made the case that Kankite's biggest moral mistake wasn't just being biased. It was like he didn't have any. It was that honesty that made him so strong later on. He didn't just shake up the Kennedy reputation when he finally said that JFK wasn't the hero everyone thought he was. It made his own shake. For many years the fact was kept secret. But now that CIA papers have been made public, they show something that should shock everyone. The CIA always said they didn't know much about Lee Harvey Oswald, but they did. Not only did they not say anything, but they also lied over and over. In November 1959, it all began. Oswald then turned against the U.S. and went to the USSR. From that point on, he was being watched by CIA counterintelligence led by James Jesus Angleton. They even took his mail and raided it. This wasn't just a quick check. For 4 years in a row, people were being watched. It didn't stop until a few weeks before Dallas was where John F. Kennedy was killed. He showed up in Mexico City in late 1963. He went to the embassy of both the Soviet Union and Cuba. That should have been the first red flag, but when asked about it later, the CIA pretended not to have noticed. In May 1964, Richard Helms, who would later become head of the CIA, told the Warren Commission that the agency probably didn't know much about Oswald. That was a big lie. Jefferson Emley told the House Oversight Committee in April 2025 that 3 high-level CIA officials had lied to agents. It wasn't a mistake, it was a trick. Take a look. If you don't have something to hide, why lie? The truth is that these lies hurt more than just the study, they broke it up. The Warren Commission and the House Select Committee both didn't know the answer to the most important question. Someone or something bigger killed Kennedy, and the time makes things worse. In 1961, John F. Kennedy fired the head of the CIA. He even said he wanted to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces and throw them all over the place. He was dead after only 2 years, The cover-up is no longer just an idea since these files are now public. It's written down, the CIA knew. The CIA kept an eye on things, and the CIA didn't say anything when it was most important. It's not just about the past, it's about how lies change the past.